This program is brought to you in association with First National Bank of Botswana. South Africa is facing a looming food shortage crisis, according to some reports. Agri-SA is of the view that record power cuts have caused shortages of some staples, threatening price increases that could make some popular food items too expensive for poor families. In an interview with online news portal MoneyWeb, a local supermarket's CEO is quoted as saying the retailer has already started seeing shortages in the supply of basic essential items like maize meal, potatoes, paper, both printing and toilet paper, and a risk is also seen for milk. Sharing these sentiments is our guest this evening, Francois Bird, founder of Fair Play Movement, a not-for-profit trade movement that fights for jobs. Francois purports that South Africa's future is currently in jeopardy, as about 1 in every 4 children under 5 has stunted growth due to families not being able to afford food staples, especially animal protein. He joins us via Zoom meetings from the United States of America in Washington, D.C. to discuss. Francois, thank you so much for coming on First Issues and affording us your time. We are talking to you today about the looming food crisis in South Africa. Perhaps let us start off this conversation by you explaining to our viewer exactly what is happening in that regard.
The Fair Play Movement is really worried that South Africa is stumbling into a hunger pandemic. 6 million people are already estimated to be food insecure because poor energy access is limiting food access. As you know, there are electricity load shedding. So due to daily electricity blackouts, farmers, food producers, and retailers are all distressed. And calamity is piling on pain for consumers, especially when you take into account that even the middle class now has started going into debt to buy food, as was recently reported. Yeah. It's no surprise that people are under pressure because unemployment at 32.9% means 8 million people in South Africa are unemployed. You take into account that food inflation was up by 14% in March. And even though inflation has this week been reported to be falling, food inflation is really having an effect. There is a knock-on effect from all of these problems, and that is on health. For instance, 27% of children in South Africa under 5 are stunted. This means that their brains and their bodies don't fully develop, and unless this is turned around before they're 5 years old, they are stunted for life. They cannot have their full potential realized. And the solution is very simple but difficult, apparently, and that is that pregnant mothers have to get enough animal protein while they're pregnant, and children under 5 have to get enough animal protein to ensure that they can fully develop. So in South Africa, we are literally starving our future, and therefore the Fair Play Movement is calling for an emergency food security summit to make both short and longer term plans to prevent starvation and unrest, as we have seen in places like Sri Lanka, for instance, when the harvest did not materialize and there was a food shortage, the government fell. We do not want South Africa and Southern Africa to become a hotbed of unrest and instability. And that is why we think the answer to that, for preventing instability, is to have proper plans in place, both in the short term and in the longer term, to prevent hunger and instability taking over.
One of the shorter-term solutions that you're calling for is zero-rated fat on bone-in meat, which is chicken. Why that solution? Why do you think that is the solution, and why particularly chicken, which you believe would be help pregnant mothers access animal protein and, of course, the children that are under 5 who are facing stunted growth?
Chicken is the most consumed animal protein of middle class and poor people in South Africa. It is popular throughout the world because it's affordable. But this affordability is currently an issue in South Africa for all the reasons we've explained. When you take into account the value-added tax on poultry is 15%, by scrapping value-added tax, you immediately give essentially a discount of 15%, particularly taking into account that already the poultry producers have formally said that they would pass on the benefit to consumers, and we believe the retailers will do the same. This is why we need to get everyone together to make this plan. Government has to act by scrapping value-added tax. Retailers have, and food producers have to pass that value-added tax benefit on to consumers, and that will make it more affordable. But it's not enough. We also have to take other measures to ensure that we get out of this particular problem. One of the important things is to reach an agreement between Eskom, the electricity supplier, and the farming community, so that agricultural and food producers, as well as their distribution channels, the retailers who have to make the food available to ordinary people, are able to have power when they need the power, not in an ad hoc schedule that doesn't take into account the requirements of agricultural food production and retailing. And so that is the reason why we want to get everyone together.
Well, the South African government has committed to helping farmers who've gone green, as far as solar panels, recycling, that sort of thing. They have committed to helping financially, but you still feel that is not enough?
It's part of the solution. We are not saying the government doesn't want to do anything, but we don't believe that it is all that is required. And that is because when you take into account how many small-scale chicken farmers there are, and how much of the food of ordinary people throughout the country, particularly in rural areas and in lower income households in the townships, are provided by small poultry farmers, we believe there's more work to be done. And some of the measures we've already indicated will be vital. But by talking to each other and focusing on preventing hunger through improving the ability of food producers and retailers, as well as the ability of consumers to afford food, it will be possible, we think, to avoid the scenario that we hope will not materialize, but think is very likely.
With all of the assistance, the financial assistance that the South African government is willing to commit to, is already committed to, and the solutions that the Fair Play movement is calling for, do you think that these are measures that the economy currently can handle or can afford, given that the South African government is already grappling with very high levels of fiscal debt and the economy is not doing well? What kind of long-term effects on the economy, of course, do you think this can cause, if any at all?
The country's ability to afford the scrapping of VAT, we believe, can be enhanced by import duties, not import duties in a general sense, but particularly import duties that have been levied and that can be levied on dumpers. In other words, countries and their suppliers who sell chicken below the cost of their own market or their production. And that is why we think by simply applying the rules of the World Trade Organization, the trade minister, Minister Patel, who has the right and waived that right or postponed that right for a year to levy these anti-dumping duties on specific countries and organizations that have dumped in the past. They've been found guilty of it by ITAC. And therefore, that money could be used to offset the scrapping of value-added tax on portions of chicken that poor people can afford and normally buy. It's not a general imposition of scrapping value-added tax. And therefore, these are very targeted measures that will be affordable for the country, but is vital for its stability.
I'm talking to you or having this conversation with you from Botswana, a country that is heavily reliant on South Africa for some of its food parcels. Do you think that if the situation in South Africa is not arrested, there could be worrisome spillover effects into Botswana?
The fragility is the issue that Botswana should worry about. The fragility of South Africa, because when you look at South Africa, it displays some of the symptoms of a classified fragile nation, officially classified by international organizations. So if you take into account a shaky infrastructure, institutional corruption, a staggering official unemployment rate of over 32%, the bleak picture of looming hunger, we have a situation where South Africa could very well become a fragile state, particularly if we take into account that even the ruling party's Secretary General recently, Mr. Fikile Mbalula, recently said that South Africa could become a failed state. We don't believe it's on its way to being a failed state already, but it certainly is more fragile than it's ever been. And therefore, we think that the imposition of anti-dumping tariffs in August this year will help somewhat for the country to afford scrapping of value-added tax, which will help consumers to have the kind of food that they require for their health to become more affordable. And we believe food producers also require help. If you take into account that, for instance, the largest poultry producer in South Africa recently announced in its results presentation an 88% decline in operating profit, that it had to spend 740 million rand due to load shedding, that it processed 17% fewer broilers. It's very clear that something must be done. And this drop in production is unnecessary if we take into account that for a nation to be food secure, people also have to be food secure. It's not enough that there's enough food available in the nation, but all its people need access to the food. And these plans must be made now, because if we don't make these plans and we simply allow the current situation to drag on, then South Africa is heading to a dark place, literally.
Well, Francois, this issue of the looming food crisis is not one that is heavily discussed in media anywhere, whether in South Africa here or anywhere really. Perhaps because of the load shedding issue or the electricity supply issues that are grappling the country, that is South Africa, right? With that, do you not think that your concerns may be viewed as hyper sensationalized?
That is why we're being very sensitive about how and what we ask for. We are not trying to create panic, but we believe urgent action is necessary to make plans in time. Yeah. Panic would arise if no plans are made, no steps are taken, and matters keep getting worse. We can avoid this kind of failure. We can avoid the hunger getting worse by working together. And this is not a job for government only. It's time for South Africans to stop standing in a circle and shooting at each other, metaphorically speaking. Instead of arguing, I think everyone should get together and say, we are where we are, but how do we get out of this, and how do we prevent something worse happening? And it's important for the neighborhood. If South Africa falls into a more fragile state, there will be a knock-on effect for Botswana, for Namibia, for Mozambique, Swaziland, Lesotho. All its neighbors will feel the effects, and it's unnecessary. And that is why we call for everyone to get together, including government, and to make a plan, because it's pointless trying to decide now who's responsible for the problem. The issue now is, how do we prevent the problem from getting worse? How do we get out of it?